Dominic Cummings is a good place to start if you're concerned about recent protests in the UK and in America and the Black Lives Matter protests. If at the time the mainstream media, hideous celebrities and knee-jerk protesters had spent as much time and energy criticising the imprisonment, the torture and the slow murder of Julian Assange for journalism rather than Dominic Cummings for going for a drive, perhaps justice would have been served. But no, it's easier to attack Cummings and add another chapter to the inane blame culture. There was something sickening about, or have I got news for you, to see rubber-faced waxworks, smug, bloated with metropolitan media, lovey self-entrancement, smirking their way through a programme that, like the people in it, is 25 years past its sell-by date in terms of talent, humour and relevance. The BBC should be renamed the Bloated Bigots Corporation. We know, of course, that the witch hunt against Cummings, or wizard hunt, was because he was a significant architect in Brexit and years ago said openly what most people know, that the BBC is the enemy of the Tory party. This was part of a safe, gutless hunt that shames us all. The bigger picture is how it connects with so much else. Because we've had a top-down model of vitriol and hatred for years from the political establishment. The denigration by the media and their parasitic hangers-on of anyone who voted for Brexit, the systematic closing down of free speech, the politicising of education into propaganda, and the purveyors of knee-jerk identity politics. The remorseless, wearying bile against Farage, Trump, Johnson, now Cummings, people in public life wishing others, like Boris Johnson, a horrible death. All this has come from a hideously perverted left and mainstream culture that hates everything that is not itself and is therefore self-consumingly narcissistic. And has spiralled out of control. It is almost exclusively one-way ideological traffic that is remorseless in its hatred and venom. And of course there will be backlashes, and then it becomes a crass and boring debate between, is it the far left or the far right who are behaving the worst. The time was that satire and humour were used to blow holes in orthodoxies, to let some fresh air in. But now it's about stifling ideas and opinions and free speech and insisting upon a narrow orthodoxy of woke platitudes. And if you disagree, you're a racist or a fascist or a Nazi. Societies that ban Gone with the Wind, the In-Betweeners and 40 Towers from the screens because of race and gender are infantilizing us to a state in which we will be unable to make any decisions for ourselves. And we will, as we mostly already are, be fed a cultural diet of asinine crap. And it's in this toxic air that we are now capsizing and losing ourselves, our identities and our culture. A collective hatred has poisoned the very air we breathe for years, of which COVID-19 is an ironic reminder. And that hatred that emanated from the political class is now reaping its harvest in the riots, the lootings, the demand to disband the police, the mob mentality of current protests. These things are the children of the hatred engendered by the political class, mainstream media, political left, academia, and won't they be pleased? Black lives matter, white lives matter, animal lives matter, all lives matter. Black Lives Matter is directly related to a cultural and educational insistence that everything is about a ludicrously simplistic identity politics. You're either a victim or an oppressor, according to the group of which you are a member. The cultural Marxists, the left-wing liberals and academics, the politicians who've done so much to dumb down educational and cultural machines to a point of cowardly servitude to identity politics, will be rejoicing in the violence of looting and mob elements in protests. It's grist to their mill, it's news. They won't be there themselves, of course, unless it's safe. No, they're the intellectuals and the commentators, so they will be where they always are, in front of a screen or behind a newspaper, masturbating furiously into their lattes and bowls of granola in sheer delight at the way things are falling apart, which they are. They are slaves to their own totalitarian thinking. which wants to close down, shame and destroy all opposition. And as George Orwell said, these people don't see that if you encourage totalitarian methods, the time may come when they will be used against you instead of for you. Why don't the protesters who enjoy defacing and destroying statues and throwing bicycles at police horses go to Mongolia and knock down the statue of Genghis Khan, rapist, looter, murderer, enslaver? Good luck with the locals there. I don't think they'll be quite so passive when you turn up with your placards and iPhones and Facebook posts and cappuccinos. How about the statue of Tamburlaine in Uzbekistan? I'm sure the locals there would be hugely interested in your rants. Try throwing a bicycle at the horse of local policemen there and see what happens. Why not demolish the Great Pyramids because they were made by slaves? And knock down St. Peter's and the Colosseum in Rome because they were built by slaves. Jewish slaves mostly built the Colosseum. The Acropolis in Athens, slaves. Muhammad was a slave trader. Why not demolish all mosques? Why not ban Islam altogether? And why not knock down every ancient public building in the world? Because either they were built by slaves or by labourers so poorly paid by the establishment of the day that they were, if you want to get Marxist about it, arguably slaves. Destroy statues of Churchill and Gandhi. Knock down everything. Obliterate it all. Destroy all civilizations altogether. You may as well, because you can't cherry pick what happens to suit current prejudices. The whole point of civilizations and their rural and in particular urban landscapes is that they are maps of the past. Warts and all. Civilizations are stories. They carry the scars of their mistakes, their joys, their failures and their achievements. And reading that story is to learn something and to be reminded of who you are, where you came from, what you've achieved and what you need to put right. If you obliterate it, you learn nothing and are merely looking at a reflection of yourself, like Narcissus, looking into the pool and falling in love with himself. When you live in a culture that wants to take down a statue of Gandhi and erect one for a swearing rap singer, you know you're in a downward slope. One of the more sickening aspects of England and other countries in recent years is white liberal guilt and its phony hand-wringing and carnival apologetics. This is, of course, exploited by some protesters to see government officials and police officers and ordinary people getting down on their knees to apologise for a past that they had nothing to do with and have in all probability not profited from is disgusting. It is a ritual humiliation and debasement. It has nothing to do with respect. It's an act of slavery to mob rule. It is part of a collective guilt and apologetics that can only end badly. If you subjugate people, there will be a kickback, whatever their colour. And the problem with this sort of apologetics is that there is no end to it. Well, how about the Italians getting on their knees and apologising to the British for invading and enslaving us? And the Danes, they invaded us. And the Normans, the French and the Flemish, they should be on their knees to us. Senegal and Nigeria and Ghana should be on their knees for what they did to the Gambia. And Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, Sudan, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Egypt, Jordan and Morocco should be on their knees to the Yemen. And all Chinese on their knees to Vietnam. And then the whole of Europe on their knees to each other and the rest of the world for their empires. The French, the Dutch, the Belgians, the Italians, and don't even mention the Germans. And America should be on their knees to just about everyone, and Russia, of course, and all the African nations that enslaved other nations, and the Muslim empires that conquered and enslaved everyone from Turkey to India, and the Ottoman empires to nearly everyone in the known world. Just about the whole world should be on its knees if you follow through with the nonsense of apologetics. But of course, the left-wing ideologues, most mainstream media, the BBC, most career politicians aren't interested in history and the study of it. It's too messy and complicated. What they prefer is an eternal now, where the only thing that matters is their opinion. History is merely a grossly simplified and perverted stick to beat people with now. White privilege, colonialism, imperialism, slavery, racist, capitalist, fascist, these knee-jerk buzz terms thrown out indiscriminately can be a shorthand for someone who has either lost or never had the ability to think. As Orwell said, if one loves democracy, the argument runs from the point of view of these people, one must crush its enemies no matter by what means. And who are the enemies? It always appears that they are not only those who attack it openly and consciously, but they are those who objectively endanger it by spreading mistaken doctrines. So in other words, defending democracy involves destroying all independence of thought. And this argument was used, for instance, to justify the Russian purges, the Chinese genocide, the Cambodian genocide, and now it's happening in European culture, and like lemmings, many are rushing to embrace it. Recent years have been a remorseless ride to divisiveness, suspicion, hatred, and a complete loss of identity in the West. The Brexit divide, in which the minority despised the majority and refused to accept the democratic result of the referendum and two general elections. The COVID-19 climate of repression, fear and mutual suspicion. Now, the Black Lives Matter protests, which have a sinister side, and the inevitable reactions to them. These things have exhausted the nation, which many will be glad about because this is precisely what they wanted. And what on earth do they think will emerge from it? Some kind of giant hippie paradise or a socialist utopia? Well, good luck with that. You're more likely to get a totalitarian, impoverished, repressive, miserable culture of violence and depression. Politicians, ever opportunistic, are piggybacking on the Black Lives Matter protests in the hope of cheap publicity and woke approval. And behind all this is the desire to unravel Western society. It was the declared aim, the publicly declared aim of the hugely influential Frankfurt School, a bunch of very wealthy people in the early 20th century and intellectuals who controlled most of the media. Their list of commandments include, and I'm quoting, the creation of racism offences and hate speech laws, continual change to create confusion, e.g. in school curricula, the systematic undermining of parental and teachers' authority, huge immigration to destroy national identity and form and foment race wars, the systematic promotion of excessive drinking and recreational drugs, an unreliable legal system with bias against the victims of crime, dependency on state benefits, controlling and dumbing down of media, encouraging the breakdown of the family, and an all-out attack on Christianity and the emptying of churches. I'd say they've been hugely successful. And once societies are hopelessly weakened and no one knows who the hell they are anymore because all their landmarks have gone, that is the moment when the real power group, the string pullers, the big brother element, the Bilderberger group, move in and take control. Oh, you got violence and looting on your streets. No problem, we'll sort it out for you. But oh, we didn't mention it, did we? There's a price, and that price is your freedom. Black Lives Matter presupposes that there is a group that they're protesting against which thinks that black lives don't matter. And who are these hateful people? It turns out, of course, that they are white privileged people, which is itself an inherently racist and atrocious term. If you target as the enemy a specific group based on ethnicity and make assumptions about all the component elements of that group and, for example, make them kneel like slaves in the street in some grotesque parody of guilt simply because they have white skin, then you are behaving in a reprehensibly racist manner and all you're looking for is trouble. Black lives matter, white lives matter, animal lives matter, all lives matter. And there is no end to this, which is what the troublemakers want. They don't want an end. They want persistent chaos and destruction in the pursuit of some narcissistic, unrealizable utopia that only exists in the poverty of their imaginations. And there will be kickbacks to it. Why is what is happening so partisan? Why isn't the Said Business School in Oxford being targeted for demolition? Syrian Saudi billionaire Wafiq Said, political fixer, arms dealer, credited with helping Saudi Arabia buy British weapons so they can bomb the Yemen back to the Dark Ages. So corrupt a man that even Barclays Bank wanted to distance themselves from him. Bizarrely, if you Google him, below his picture it says his father is Rida Said and the picture is of Prince Charles. Speaks volumes. Why not protest against China? Its repressive regime and re-education camps are a form of slavery. Why aren't radical Muslim factions being demonstrated against? They are racist and intolerant. They fit the criteria for being punished. Is it that they aren't white, so they must be okay? Nazifa Zaman, the chair of the University of Warwick Labour Society, celebrated Boris Johnson contracting the coronavirus. She took to Twitter and said, "PM got COVID, happy Muslim Women's Day again." And a Muslim friend of hers replied saying that Johnson's positive result shows that the dua, or Islamic term for prayer, is being answered. In her biography, Zaman identifies herself as the chair of Warwick Labour and an advocate of Warwick Decolonise, a group dedicated to decolonising the curriculum at the whole university. This means excluding anything, including the best that has been written and thought, if it doesn't fit a narrow Islamic band of thinking. The local Labour MP refused to comment directly on this. I wonder why. Why aren't British universities being demolished for taking money and accepting influence from some of the world's worst dictatorships with appalling human rights records? Oxford, Cambridge, Durham, Exeter and others. Since 1986, the University of Oxford and the Oxford Centre for Islamic Studies have accepted a combined total of more than 130 million in donations from sources such as the Saudi royal family, the Malaysian government, and even the Bin Laden dynasty. In 1997, the Oxford Centre for Islamic Studies received 20 million from the now deceased King Fahd of Saudi Arabia. There's a long list of them, and by donating to higher education institutions, Arab and Islamic states are able to dictate a research agenda and influence public opinion in a way which we would not allow for our political parties. These donors influence the debate, but they can also indoctrinate students. But guess what? They don't have white privilege, so it's fine. Keep the money and the ideology rolling in. So protesters against victimisation, oppression and privilege are themselves partisan and divisive in their choice of oppressors. The servility with which the greater part of the English intelligentsia have swallowed and repeated identity politics propaganda is nothing new. They did the same with Stalinist Russia. You could criticise Churchill, but say a word against Stalin and you were an outcast. The British police are now in an impossible position. On the one hand, rightly criticised for not persecuting predominantly Pakistani grooming gangs because they fear criticism of racism, especially in wards where the Labour Party in particular depends on the Muslim and black vote. On the other hand, they're given inflated powers during the COVID lockdown. On the one hand, ignoring crimes committed by Muslim grooming gangs, on the other, vilified for being prejudiced against blacks. It must be extremely confusing to be a British police officer now, because the police force is being manipulated by all sides. And in the States, like Seattle, where protesters have now ousted police, if people think a police-free zone is going to be some sort of hippie or socialist paradise, it isn't. Already the protesters in Seattle and the Black Lives Matter people have fallen out there. Already the protesters are in disarray and there's infighting. So in less than a week, the cracks turn into outright hostility, and the real powers that be move in with their military hardware to clean things up. Don't say you weren't warned. Because the middle ground has been banished, you either have to be for or against something, as if in life and reality is that simple. As George Orwell said in his proposed preface to Animal Farm, if liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. It is the liberals who fear liberty and the intellectuals who want to do dirt on the intellect. When I was growing up, there was a strong sense in the UK of having safety nets, no matter what class or background you came from. And these included things like health, law and order, and education. These safety nets are disappearing rapidly. You could say they've already gone, and many of us will fall through the gaping holes. Even 50 years ago, if you asked English people what being English meant, most would have an answer. It would probably include things like family, sense of humour, parliament, democracy, neighbourliness, and it might include the church and royalty. But I suspect if you ask people now, they would just look confused. Now, of course, cultures change, but they can change for the worse. They can also be destroyed. And I fear this is what is happening to England and much of Europe.